Today, I'll be talking a bit about hiring, and not through the lens that most of us are usually familiar with, which is applying to a bunch of jobs, maybe getting rejected, maybe getting one or two, but from the other perspective of recruiters, hiring managers, and interviewers, and what the experience of hiring is like for them, and how I've worked with my team to develop products that help bring their most human aspects into their day-to-day work. So I'll start out with a little story from when I was in university. It was this beautiful day in Berkeley, and I was sitting outside just having a sandwich, minding my own business, and a friend of mine walked by, and she was headed to this architecture lecture that she'd been raving to me about. And I was like, you know, I'm not doing much, so I'll go. We go to this class, I sit down, and everyone else is taking the class, and so they're actually paying attention, and I very quickly regretted it. All of these slides of different types of columns, all of these different pieces of architecture, they're just going through dates and all of these sort of pieces of minutia that really were not entertaining me. But the professor stops, and she puts a word on the board called venustas, beauty. And she starts describing how all of these pieces of architecture that she was showing were reflections of their culture's ideals of beauty. And so she went into breaking down what that meant from Greece to Peru, and just going around the globe, starting to explain and unpack what beauty meant in these different contexts. And she gets to a picture of a mosque ceiling like this one. Sort of an overwhelming blue, and she starts going into the details of the engineering behind it, of how all of these domes fit together, and you know how really it's truly a feat of engineering for this building to be standing. And then she moves sort of into the calligraphy and the geometry. Talks about how the intricacy and the level of detail needed to be able to get this all to fit together and to have the artistic vision to pull this together was unlike anything of its time. And she's sort of going on, and I'm starting to regret it again. And then she stops. She says, "Geometry is great, but blue will change your life. Geometry is great, but blue will change your life." And I think that the class was pretty split in this regard. You get one half of people that are like, what the hell does that mean? And the other half was like, okay. I was in the And she goes on to explain how when you're entering this mosque and you're coming to pray, you're not thinking for a moment about how this building is held up. You're not thinking about all of the sophistication that's really worthy of all of our awe that went into making this building happen. You're just so struck by the immense blue and put in a place of humbling that you're then able to sit, worship, and pray in awe of this beauty, in awe of this venustas. And so this has stuck with me beyond, because I think as UX researchers, we see some form of this in our work. We are often working on some of the most complex products out there, working with teams that are grueling all day over making these really sophisticated tools for our users. But often what sticks most to us and sticks with our teams when we share them are these quotes of how a tool, a product, how an experience changed someone's day, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. You know, maybe your tool didn't make it easy enough to let them get what they needed done, and it ruined their day at work. Happens. And all of these quotes are really the blue of our experiences as researchers, the things that stick with us and sort of motivate us to keep doing the work we do. And so in my work at Google, Over the last 2 years, I've been working on two products under Google Cloud. The first is Hire, which is a recruiting app for businesses using G Suite to manage their hiring processes. So what that means is a place to track all the applications you're getting into your company, review resumes, share feedback as a team, collaborate, and then ultimately extend offers and optimize your hiring processes, see where people might be dropping off in your interview cycles. So there, we're often talking to recruiters, hiring managers, and interviewers as our primary users. And second, Cloud Talent Solution is a suite of APIs that power job-related queries. So if you ever looked on a career site, typed user researcher, no positions come up. You type UX researcher, a million come up, hopefully. That's sort of one of the pains that our APIs look to solve and make these searches smarter, more accurate. So today I'll mostly be talking about Hire and some of the learnings we've had there, but they sort of extend more broadly, hopefully, into hiring that we can take away totally. If you've had the experience of hiring people onto your team, you might be able to relate to some of what we hear from recruiters and hiring managers. At first, it's a pretty exciting prospect. You're like, sweet, I don't have to do as much work. We're going to hire this person. They're going to save our lives. And then very quickly, you're sort of humbled. You realize how overwhelming it can be as just an undertaking. You don't know how to describe the job you do. You don't know where people even are and if they're going to apply to your job. You don't know how you would assess if they can even do the job. And as you start to do this for dozens and dozens of positions that you might have open, it starts to feel like this. And this is the day-to-day of recruiters. They're talking to dozens of candidates throughout the day, throughout the hour, and they're thinking of all of these questions on behalf of their teams. And hiring managers sort of have a stake in it as well, that these decisions are going to stick with their teams lasting for months going forward, depending on the decisions that the team makes together. So it's pretty overwhelming. And so in building enterprise tools and any products that any of us work on, it's really easy to hear all those questions, hear how overwhelming it is, and think about the pain points that our users have and all of the million workflows that they have to go through. And for us, oftentimes, we really, as a team, I started to notice, we're focusing on places where we could improve efficiency, relieve pain, and sort of optimize these workflows in a very technical sense. And it, for me, wasn't particularly motivating. I wasn't really sort of really relating to the problems and the challenges, the feelings that I was getting from the conversations with recruiters, and I wanted to bring that to the rest of my team. So what I'll be talking about today is going through a few different case studies for how I've worked with my team to reframe some of these problems as metaphors and human relationships that we can all use to both talk internally as a team and in our research talk to users about their experiences and better reflect their human sensibilities into how we think about developing products for them. So we'll start out first with a little thought exercise together. So let's say I have a portrait in my head that I will describe to you all in 300 words or less. And if you all had, whatever art utensils you want, crayons, markers, watercolor, whatever, you could all sit there and, paint, draw that portrait. How many of you think that you'd be able to get exactly what was in my head? All right, I saw a little one, shy. That's probably about right. It's, you might be able to make a good portrait, paint a good picture, but it won't really be what I'm imagining. If I give you paint by numbers, if you're familiar with these, you get a number that corresponds to a color, and you can fill in sort of this frame. If I give you that, who thinks you could do a better job? Maybe not perfect, but better. All right. Well, so this is sort of one of the core tenets of hiring, recruiting, HR practices for assessing candidates that are coming through. It's called structured feedback. By sharing a shared structure, a shared set of evaluation criteria and guidelines for a group of people to use, they can better paint a picture of the person that they're all assessing. So if we imagine that I'm the hiring manager looking to fill this portrait, fill this position on my team for a user researcher, for example, it really helps if I can give my team the structures that I want to assess a candidate on their role-related knowledge, so maybe methods that they're familiar with, their experience working with designers, PMs, engineers, their ability to communicate and collaborate with others. All of those pieces as structures will make me and my team collectively be able to make a better decision. But the concept of this is often framed as structured feedback. So when our team was looking to approach structured feedback, this is how we approached the problem to start. I think you can imagine some of the problems that come about. If I, doing the same thought exercise, give you all that, you'll probably be able to do a pretty good job getting the exact person I'm looking for. But you'll find the challenge is that that person does not exist. And it will be so painful and time consuming to fill that in that none of you are actually going to do it. So what that means is all of the people that we may have interviewed are going to go start interviewing for other jobs. They're going to start getting impatient. They're going to drop off, and we're not going to be able to hire these mythical, perfect people. And so what we did is, as a team, I went back and collectively we came to this idea of this metaphor of thinking of structured feedback through not necessarily the lens of filling in a structure and developing a structure, but thinking of it as a collective painting exercise. If we all sat together and had to develop a picture of a person, what does that look like? What sort of constraints come up? What are some of the challenges that come with many people doing such a qualitative human thing, judging another person? How do we make that easier? How do we make it more equitable? How do we make it unbiased in ways that we could reflect in the development of a product? And so as a result, a lot of the solutions that come out of it aren't particularly mind-boggling. They're not super shocking, but they're really small details that reflect how our users' pains exist and how they occur during their day-to-day. So one piece of that is, for example, making sure that my 300 words describing this imaginary portrait are captured alongside where interviewers will be providing their feedback. That we have a shared language for what where that creative direction should be headed and what we want out of it. Similarly, we need to be able to have a shared language for what the structures we're developing as a team might be. So if they're role-related knowledge and leadership, what does that mean? We had to make it both sort of configurable and adaptable and flexible for a whole range of hiring teams. You have people hiring software engineers to warehouse workers. How do we structure feedback forms to encapsulate what works for everyone and make sure that it's reflective of what they're actually assessing on and not just their judgments of a person at a surface level? And so beyond just within a team, we see these sorts of metaphors we started to see them help our team think through problems a little bit differently. Think through it through these things that are very tangible, very sort of human in ways that our workflows and processes weren't capturing. And so we started exploring a new problem. We started seeing that recruiters have never seen this screen. So if any of you have had the privilege, this is what it's like when you've responded to all of your emails. It's beautiful. And what we see instead is I will sit down next to a recruiter and we'll see their inbox, and it's truly overwhelming. There's just floods of people being like, have you looked at my application? When is my interview? Why didn't I make the cut? All of these things. It's truly like I can't look at it. But they love it. It takes a ton of time, but recruiters love it. And we're trying to understand what's going on there. Like, how could we make this less time consuming? It's just so truly painful to go through an inbox that's constantly being bombarded. And I was having a hard time articulating to my team why I felt like reducing the time it took wasn't really capturing what we knew about recruiters in this case. So I went home, and I'm not a good cook at all, but I love cooking dinner for my roommates and friends, and have perfected a few pasta dishes that, do the trick. And so I texted everyone that I was going to be making dinner that night. I went to the store and I bought, all the necessary ingredients, Oreos, wine, and get home, and I look at everything on the kitchen island and was like starting to regret it. I was like, all right, so I have to chop the onions. I'm prepping them. I'm chopping the other ingredients, boiling the water, doing all the business. And I'm sort of complaining to my roommate the whole time. I'm starting to see the dishes pile up and nobody's doing them. I'm whining and whining. And he stops me, like, why did you offer to make us dinner in the first place? Like, we could have just ordered in. Like, I have Postmates, we have DoorDash. Like, this is it's 2019. There's a million of these things. And like, honestly, my solution was that he do the dishes, that he chop the onions, but he wasn't taking the hint. And in much the same way, when you study recruiters for years, you start to become similar like, dogs and their owners. It was sort of similar to what I kept hearing from recruiters, that they have these crafts that they're honing, that they enjoy doing, but they come with some baggage. For me, cooking pasta for the roommates means having to chop onions, do the dishes. That's some baggage. I don't want to do it. But I love the act itself. For recruiters, most of them got into the profession because they love talking to candidates. They love getting on the phone with someone and saying that they got the job. They love getting to see that someone that they've hired onto a team is a great fit and that everyone loves them. And so, going back to the team and telling them the story, we're able to start talking about this problem of the empty inbox a bit differently, and framing it not as a challenge where they are just overwhelmed and need to spend less time on communicating with candidates. It's that they wanted to spend more time doing certain parts of that. They wanted to hone their craft without the baggage. And so what we did was started to explore different models for how we could use relationships and human experiences for how people related to their coworkers, their tools, and one another, to start understanding how they related to their work. So, for example, framing for a recruiter, imagining that they had an assistant, someone sitting right next to them, a physical person that they could peek over at, watch what they were doing, but someone that they could pass off the tasks that they didn't want to do. What would you give? What would you maybe take an extra look at? And what would you maybe want to do yourself because you like it? What sort of stuff would you really not trust anyone ever to do? What sort of things would you hold off if you were on vacation, or need to make sure kept maintained while you were on vacation? And what stood out to us and sort of surprised me was not as much how this helped generate different ideas for what we could build into our product, but it really showed us how recruiters related to others and how they saw themselves. it showed us what they really thought that their unique value was in their jobs, and that was something that we were missing when we framed all of our problems as workflows and pain points. We were missing the fact that they love what they do, and that there were opportunities to not only solve what was painful, but also amplify where they bring their skills, where they bring their talents, and really find joy in their day-to-day work. So I'll just give two examples of some of the work that we've done that's sort of extended from this and things that have gone forward. So recruiters do not enjoy rejecting candidates, and it's shocking, but they don't. We found that recruiters were spending tons of time sending out rejections to all of the dozens of people that were applying, because for every person that gets the job, there's hundreds that don't. And so sitting down and having to reject everyone and track why you were rejecting them is a really emotionally draining process. You have to sit down and be ready to tell all of these people that are really hopeful that it's not going to happen for them. And so we need to find ways to make that happen in both an accountable way and sort of a systemically sort of efficient way in our platform, while also being sensitive to the fact that this is often a really difficult experience for candidates and often doesn't even happen. Conversely, sort of to what I was saying about what they love to do, we wanted to play up the things that they really do enjoy. So the example of a phone call, for example. When a recruiter gives you a call, it might be the best call of their day, might be the best call of your day, it comes with some baggage. There's a prologue and an epilogue that goes on there. Prologue is that they're trying to find your number. They might have a Post-it that has what your last vacation was, when your birthday might be, your kid's name. I've seen it. People, they write down all of these details that they might learn about you throughout the hiring process, so that when it comes to the offer and they ask you about your kid and you refer to them by name, you feel like you've been heard, you've been met as a person, and truly that this would be a good team for you to join. But they have to scrounge up that Post-it, and it's really, really annoying. And they're also looking up your resume, they're pulling up your notes, and they probably also use their personal phone or another phone system to make the phone call. So they have to get that ready, get that going. They make the phone call, take notes, done. After the call, they have to record that it happened. It's super embarrassing to have two people give you an offer. It's great for a candidate, but it looks really unprofessional, looks really bad. So they have to track that this call happened. But as you can imagine, it gets pretty annoying to have to make a phone call and write that it happened dozens of times a day. And so what we're able to do instead was think about how we can make this whole experience focus in on what recruiters actually want to be spending time on, and that's placing the call, having their notes available, and being able to reference all of those things that they love about you and that they know about you back on your call in one cohesive place. So coming back to where we started, how do these sort of case studies extend back to this place of geometry is great, but blue will change your life? How can we think of these that are going forward as we work with our teams? Well, we can reframe it in some ways as the function of our products, the feeling of our products coming together cohesively to make an experience that makes the product really sing. Function, how should it work? What's the engineering that needs to go in to keep this ceiling up? It's really necessary. It's easy to gloss over, but it's really critical for the whole experience. Feeling. What feeling does the blue, does the awe of this huge structure imbue for our users? What does it make our products feel like? And lastly, how do those two come together? How do you do that in a way that feels cohesive so that you're not just like painting over this whole thing in blue and covering up all the tile work, but making sure that they're really enmeshed, that they're done thoughtfully. What I'd push us to think of that even further, though, is framing it around our users and framing it in terms of how our users work. So recruiters need to place phone calls, but how they feel. They also want to feel warm. They want to be able to tell you all the details about why they think you're a great fit. They want to ask you about your vacation to the Bahamas, the whole deal. And together, that creates their experience of their overall work as a whole, as a comprehensive experience as a recruiter, and not as someone that's using Hire, using another applicant tracking system at the end of the day, because that's not who they are. So I'll give one final example of how we've used that as a team to sort of reframe how we think, to capture some of the ways that recruiters speak into our work and how we've sort of internalized that as a collective. So a big piece of a recruiter's job is optimizing hiring processes for a company. So if 100 people are applying and 2 people are making it to the on-site interview, something's wrong in that process. We're maybe asking too difficult questions. We're maybe not advertising our job in the right places. There are a lot of reasons that might inform it. And recruiters are really tasked and often have to report to their CEOs, VPs, managers about what's going wrong. Why are people falling through the cracks? And in starting to explore this more and more with them, I kept hearing this phrase of hiring health. Hiring health, over and over and over. It's like, it's not necessarily an industry technical term, but people kept using it. And so in these conversations, I started asking, what does health mean to you? What does that look like? And a lot of the ways people described it reflected how they describe our physical health as people. So your relationship to a doctor. Maybe check in on it, your health, every year or so. They give you some diagnostics, they tell you how you're doing, but they give you some recommendations and they don't always feel right. They'll tell you, exercise 5 times a week. You're like, I have a job. And so they're giving you all this advice, all this insight, but it might not map to what you can actually do. So for recruiters, this is their maybe quarterly check-in with their CEO on a company's hiring, where they might be giving recommendations, but they're not really resonating with executives. On the other hand, there's how we think about health in more of an ambient model of, say, with wearables, that with certain sensors, we can pick up on our activity, we can get nudges for when to exercise a little bit more, but we're not really getting a ton of insight or diagnostics at a deep level in terms of what to do about your health. The similarities, though, were pretty striking. They told us that recruiters wanted to feel what you want to feel with your relationship with a doctor and with a wearable. You want to feel consistent. The doctor should not be telling you something very different than what a second opinion should. You want to be accurate. This needs to be spot on or else my CEO is going to grill me. Comprehensive, taking into account all of the nuances of a company's hiring process. And then all of these feelings. Feeling predictable, trustworthy, insightful, and bringing that to your team. And so what that's led us to do as a team, and as we think about how we help recruiters and hiring teams manage their processes, is challenge our product. Is our product meeting these bars? If it were a doctor, if it were a wearable, would it be up to snuff? But what I hope we've all sort of come to as we've been talking about this today is that we can push it further and make it much more effective by framing it around our user. Around that our user needs to be, at the end of the day, predictable to their CEO. They need to be insightful. And that it's their job, and not necessarily our tool's job, to be consistent, accurate, and comprehensive. We're there to enable them, and they're the ones truly delivering on it. And this all comes together again in that our product is there as a facilitator, as a final piece that helps bring together sort of the space for recruiters to do their work, to help people get jobs, to put people in seats. And it's that the people, the recruiter, that are making people feel good, making people, overjoyed with the best call that they've heard all day when they get an offer, not the product. So with that, thank you so much for being such a wonderful audience.